As a heart surgeon at the Mayo Clinic for 30 years, I saw cases every day where the difference between life and death was often just a heartbeat. I've held hundreds of human hearts in my hands, and I've seen tens of thousands of people die and come back to life. Throughout my career, I always approached everything from a scientific point of view. I had a deep belief in facts, in logic, and in understanding the world through evidence. I would even tell my students that when the brain stops getting air, any thoughts or feelings are just neurons firing for the last time, nothing more. Nothing spiritual. I was completely wrong, though I didn't know it at the time. I still consider myself a scientist, someone who believes in facts and making sense of things. But what happened to me proved that what we currently know in science isn't all there is to know. There is much more to this world than we can measure, far beyond the realm of our understanding. If you believe in God and near-death experiences, subscribe to Life at NDE today. Discover inspiring messages from God through powerful near-death stories that bring hope and understanding. Hit subscribe now and join us in spreading the light of faith. It was January 3rd, and I had just finished giving a talk on the newest techniques in heart revival at a medical conference in Phoenix. Looking back, I can't help but laugh at the irony of it all. Right after delivering my talk, I felt a sharp pain in my chest. As a heart surgeon, I knew instantly what was happening. I was having a major heart attack. When I checked my Apple Watch, I saw my heart rate skyrocketing. The doctor sitting next to me, Dr. James Chen, and I exchanged glances. "James, the anterior wall MI is in progress," I told him, already knowing the severity. According to the official records from Mayo Clinic Phoenix, I was clinically dead for 15 minutes and 12 seconds. There was no heartbeat and no brain activity. They tried fibrillation 7 times. The team later told me they were about to call it when my heart miraculously started beating again. But what happened in those minutes would take a lifetime to describe. As soon as my heart stopped, I felt like I was floating above my body. I could see everything clearly from above. Watching my co-workers working to revive me, hearing Dr. Sean calling for epinephrine, and seeing the cardiac monitor flatlining. But then, something changed. The scene began to fade, and I found myself moving through what I can only describe as a tunnel of light. But tunnel doesn't do it justice. The light was alive, conscious, and filled with love. The change from pain to peace was instantaneous. One moment, I was in unbearable pain, and the next, I was completely at peace. It was at this moment that I met Jesus. Let me explain how it happened. As I emerged from the tunnel, I found myself in what seemed like a dimension of pure light. Everything around me was illuminated. But my eyes didn't hurt from the brightness. It was a light that didn't overwhelm but filled everything with clarity. And then I heard his voice, calling my name, Jane. It came from everywhere and nowhere at once. The moment I turned around, I saw him. Everything I thought I knew about how Jesus looked was completely changed. He spoke to me. And this is where my scientific background really comes into play. His voice was unlike any I had ever heard. It resonated not only in my ears, but in every part of my being. It wasn't deep or high-pitched, but it carried perfect authority and perfect love at the same time. It wasn't just words, it was understanding. When he spoke, I understood everything in a way that went beyond language. "Jane, you have looked for truth through science, which is good," he told me. "But now you will see greater truths." And then he reached out and touched my forehead. I saw the scars from his crucifixion, but they weren't grotesque or painful to look at. They shone with a kind of triumphant light, as though they were honor badges, symbols of victory over death, suffering, and sin. At that moment, I experienced what I can only describe as complete knowledge. It wasn't just a fleeting thought or a sudden realization, it was as if the entire process of creation was laid out before me. Clear and whole. I saw the entire scope of existence. Not just the Big Bang in all its glory, but everything that followed. All the scientific discoveries I had ever learned about, from biology to physics, suddenly connected into a greater, unified picture. I understood, for the first time, that every heart I had ever worked on was designed with divine intelligence. But then, Jesus showed me something even more amazing. He took me through what looked like a window in time, and allowed me to see scenes from his life on earth. The level of detail was astonishing. I could see him teaching, healing, and interacting with people in ways that were not just visual but sensory. I could smell the dust in the air, feel the heat of the sun on my skin, and hear the subtle differences in the Aramaic and Greek dialects being spoken around him. It wasn't just a vision, it felt like I was truly there, experiencing his life firsthand. What amazed me even more was that I saw things that have never been written down in history. I saw Jesus preparing to teach early in the morning, alone with his thoughts before the crowds arrived. I saw him comforting a child whose mother had died, showing such tenderness that it broke my heart. In that moment, his love radiated with such purity and care. I saw him in private with his disciples, teaching them deeper truths about life, preparing them for their future ministry in ways I had never considered. But what struck me the most was how he dealt with people who were suffering. I had spent my entire life trying to heal people, trying to fix what was broken. But his healing went far beyond physical ailments. When he touched someone, it wasn't just their body that changed, it was their entire being. You could see how his love for them reached into the very core of who they were. It wasn't just about restoring health, it was about transforming the heart and soul. His healing was a deep, profound act of love that touched the entirety of a person's existence. Then, Jesus took me to one of the most profound moments of all, his crucifixion. I knew a lot about physical trauma as a surgeon, but what he showed me was beyond anything I could have imagined. He told me about it from his own perspective, and what I saw left me in awe. He showed me how, in that moment, he wasn't just enduring physical pain. He was also absorbing the spiritual and emotional pain of all people. It was as if he was taking on the weight of all suffering, past, present, and future, into himself. The physical pain was unimaginable. Yes. But what I saw was that he was consciously choosing to carry that suffering. Not just for himself, but for everyone. His body was in unbearable pain, but his mind was focused on something much greater. I could feel how he was absorbing all the suffering, spiritual, emotional, and physical. It was like watching a cosmic sponge soaking up an ocean of darkness. A deep, almost incomprehensible act of love. His eyes, even in the depths of pain, still carried that amazing mix of authority and compassion. He never lost focus on others. Even in the most intense moments of his crucifixion, his main concern was always for the people he loved. He showed me 7 specific moments of his life that completely changed the way I understand historical events. First, he showed me the crucifixion. But not as an observer, he allowed me to be part of his consciousness during that event. As a thoracic surgeon, I immediately recognized medical details that are not recorded in any historical accounts. For example, I saw how the nails went through his wrists, not the palms, cutting the median nerves and causing excruciating pain. I understood how the weight of his body caused progressive asphyxiation, which would have been a slow, agonizing process. But the most amazing part was being able to experience his mind during the crucifixion. Even though his body was in extreme pain, his mind was focused on something far greater. He was taking on the weight of the world's suffering, absorbing the very darkness of humanity's sins. He was not just enduring for himself, he was doing it for all of us. It was a cosmic act of love. beyond anything I could have imagined. Then, Jesus showed me another moment. I saw him at the age of 12, having a private conversation with his mother, Mary, on their rooftop in Nazareth. This was not a public moment, but a quiet, intimate one, where Jesus shared his thoughts and his love with the woman who had nurtured him. I saw the love between them, the bond they shared, and I felt the depth of their connection in a way that touched my heart. They were speaking Aramaic, which I somehow understood perfectly. In this intimate moment, I witnessed a young Jesus speaking to his mother, Mary, on their rooftop in Nazareth. He was telling her how he was becoming more aware of his own unique nature, of his divine purpose. I could feel her amazement, but also her concern and worry. As a mother, knowing that her son was destined for something extraordinary and far beyond what she had imagined for him. The complexity of this moment was deeply moving. The mix of pride, worry, and love was palpable. The second time was early in his ministry, before any miracles were recorded. Jesus met a family whose young son was suffering from acute lymphoblastic leukemia. Instead of healing the boy immediately, he spent 3 days with the family, teaching them about the deeper meaning of suffering and divine love. It was a lesson not just for the child but for the entire family. By the time he finally healed the boy, it wasn't just a physical healing. The entire family was transformed by what they had learned during those 3 days, about faith, love, and the connection between suffering and redemption. The third moment I was shown was especially powerful. It was the night before he was crucified, just hours before his time in Gethsemane. He was alone on the Mount of Olives, in complete communion with what he showed me as the entirety of human history at once. It was as though he could see the past, present, and future all in one sweeping moment. He showed me how his upcoming sacrifice would connect with every single life, how every human being would be touched by his love and his sacrifice in ways we could not yet comprehend. But he didn't just show me historical events, he also took me to see heaven and hell, and introduced me to God the Father. What I saw in hell was nothing like what is often depicted in traditional views. It wasn't a place of active torture, as some believe, but a state of being completely cut off from divine love and truth. I saw souls who had built their own prisons, the result of decisions and beliefs that kept them separated from God. The suffering was not forced upon them, it was the natural result of being disconnected from the source of all goodness. It was like a self-perpetuating pain, much like the way an autoimmune disease attacks the body. The souls weren't actively being tortured, but the absence of God's love created a constant, unbearable suffering that they could not escape. In heaven, however, I was shown something entirely different. Heaven wasn't a place with clouds and harps, it was far more profound. Imagine the deepest moment of understanding, love, and peace you've ever felt, and then multiply that by infinity. I realized that every scientific discovery I had ever made was just a small glimpse of a much bigger truth. The physical laws we study are merely shadows cast by a deeper, more fundamental reality. For instance, the math we use to explain quantum mechanics is just an approximation of something far more foundational, something that can only be understood when we see the whole picture. Jesus led me into what I can only describe as the absolute center of reality. There, I encountered a presence that was both overwhelming and very familiar. It was as though perfect truth and love could speak, and infinite wisdom and perfect compassion could be understood. What amazed me the most was that this supreme being, the source of all existence, was focused on each soul as if it were the only one in the world. I felt that every prayer, every tear, and every celebration of happiness was always present to this consciousness. It was as if time and space were secondary to the eternal, all-encompassing awareness of this divine presence. Through this experience, I also learned something that changed the way I think about science. I came to understand that what we call physical reality, including time and space, comes from this divine consciousness. In the same way that thoughts emerge from a mind, the physical universe is a manifestation of this deeper, conscious reality. And every aspect of existence is shaped by this divine intelligence. Many people think the most interesting part of my testimony is how I describe how Jesus looked. As a surgeon, I am trained to carefully observe and document what I see. And what I saw was nothing like traditional artistic depictions. But it was immediately clear to me that these depictions, though imperfect, are trying to capture the essence of the real thing. Jesus stood before me. And the first thing that struck me was his height. He was of average build. But his presence was immense, filling the space with a kind of authority that wasn't just physical, it was spiritual, magnetic, and deeply powerful. His build was athletic, but not imposing, like someone who had worked as a carpenter and walked extensively during his ministry. His skin was light olive, similar to the complexion of many modern people from the region. He looked like a man, but there was something about him that transcended the human form. His presence was beyond anything I had ever encountered. His appearance was unlike anything I had ever imagined. He had the skin of a Middle Eastern person who spent time both inside and outside. And it had a luminous quality to it, as though it were lit from within. It wasn't pale or white like European artists have often depicted, but rather the color of sun-warmed honey, alive, glowing, and full of warmth. His skin seemed to radiate with a life force that felt almost tangible, as though it held the light of the universe inside of it. His hair was perhaps the most striking difference from the usual depictions. It wasn't the dark brown or black seen in paintings, nor was it the pale blonde often shown in European art. His hair was a rich, deep color, somewhere between dark brown and chestnut, and it seemed to change depending on the light. Just like everything else in this realm, the light always moved through everything. And as it passed through his hair, you could see it shift from honey gold to deeper amber hues, flowing like liquid light. His hair fell in natural waves to just above his shoulders, perfectly groomed but still carrying the sense that it hadn't been touched by human hands. It was effortless in its beauty. His face, as someone who had studied human anatomy deeply, was something I could not fully comprehend. His features were perfectly balanced in a way that defied genetic probability. They came together with a harmonious flow that felt completely natural. His forehead was noble and proportionate, with expressive eyebrows, neither too thick nor too thin, that moved with every emotion, every thought. His nose was straight and well-formed, fitting his face perfectly. It wasn't too big or too small, it was just right, giving his face a sense of symmetry and grace. But it was his eyes that took my breath away. I have spent decades as a doctor, observing people's faces, their eyes, but nothing could have prepared me for what I saw in his eyes. They were an ever-changing color, shifting between a warm brown and a deep, penetrating blue, depending on how the light hit them. At times, they resembled precious stones like amber or sapphire. But even that doesn't begin to do them justice. His eyes held a depth of wisdom and knowledge that I couldn't fathom. But it was not just knowledge, they were filled with such tender compassion that it made me fall to my knees. In those eyes, I saw the entire universe, every joy and every sorrow. And I knew without question that he understood everything. There was no judgment in those eyes, only unconditional love and understanding. His beard was full, yet perfectly groomed, the same light brown color as his hair, framing his face in a way that added to his regal presence. His lips were expressive, and when he smiled, it was as though the entire universe lit up with happiness. There was an energy in his smile that made everything around me feel brighter, lighter, more joyful. As a surgeon, I have learned to read faces with great accuracy, but I had never seen a face with this much depth. There was a perfect balance of authority and gentleness in his expression. When he looked at you, you felt like he knew everything about you, every mistake, every fear, every victory. And yet, there was no judgment. Only love. Only understanding. His stance was royal. But it wasn't stiff or imposing. There was a natural authority about him. But he was never distant. He exuded a profound respect for everyone around him. But at the same time, there was a warmth and friendliness in his demeanor that made you feel at ease. It was as if his very presence invited you into a space of calm and peace. When he looked at you, there was no judgment, no condemnation, only understanding and love. It was the kind of openness that made you feel completely safe, even in the presence of someone so vast, so powerful, and so divine. He moved with a grace that seemed to defy the very laws of physics. Each of his movements was effortless, as though every gesture was a perfect, purposeful expression of beauty and divine intention. It wasn't simply walking or moving, it was as if he flowed through the space around him, completely in tune with the world and the universe. His presence felt like the harmony of the cosmos itself was attuned to him. His every step was quiet, yet there was a subtle reverberation to it, like an unspoken command that resonated through nature itself. It was as if he commanded the very elements without saying a word. The way he carried himself was not just about posture. It was far more than that. It was a living, breathing testimony to the divine order of all things. Each movement was imbued with grace, fluidity, and a profound sense of purpose. He didn't just walk through the space, he flowed through it. There was no hesitance, no struggle. He was fully aware, fully present in every motion. And each movement seemed to have meaning beyond what I could comprehend. It felt as though everything in the universe was in perfect alignment with him, with his every action a reflection of something much greater than mere human existence. His clothing was simple yet immaculate. It was so spotless, so smooth. It almost seemed as though it were glowing with an inner light. It wasn't just that his robe was free from dirt or imperfection, there was something far more profound about the fabric itself. It wasn't silk, linen, or any earthly material I could name. It was as though the very essence of light had woven it together. His robe moved like living light, shifting in a way that mirrored his own movements, fluid and natural, as though the robe itself was a reflection of the divine energy within him. The color of his robe was mostly white, but not the harsh, sterile white of hospital gowns or man-made fabric. It was the soft, warm color of morning sunlight, a light that felt gentle, inviting, and peaceful. There was no sharp contrast or harshness to it. Instead, it radiated a soothing energy, like the warmth of the sun kissing your skin in the early hours of dawn. It wasn't an overpowering light, but one that was nurturing and comforting. The light seemed to flow from him, as though he was not only wearing it, but embodying it. The very fabric of his robe seemed to reflect his essence, his love, his wisdom, and his divine nature. At times, parts of his robe seemed to shift in color, subtly changing between hues of deep blue and purple, shades that I couldn't even recognize from the earthly spectrum. These colors were unlike anything I had ever seen, otherworldly, transcendent, as though they existed beyond the boundaries of our physical reality. They were colors that seemed to belong to the divine realm, the very spectrum of heaven itself. Colors that resonated with the deep truths of the universe. His clothes, like his movements, were more than just an outward appearance. They were a reflection of his profound, eternal nature. The light that radiated from him seemed to fill the space, and in his presence, everything felt illuminated, not by a harsh, blinding light, but by a warm, gentle radiance that brought peace and understanding. It was as if he carried the very essence of the divine in every part of his being. And the light he wore was simply an outward manifestation of the purity and love that defined him. There were parts of his robe that shifted in color, moving between deep blue and purple, shades I couldn't even recognize. They were colors beyond the spectrum of anything I had ever seen. Almost as though they existed in a realm beyond human perception. These colors seemed to transcend the physical world, showing that there was so much more to this existence than I could understand. It was as if his clothing itself was a tangible manifestation of the divine realm, woven with the colors of the cosmos and the spirit. When he looked into my eyes, I felt as though he could see right into my soul. His gaze held everything, every thought, every feeling, every experience, and yet, there was no judgment in it. His eyes weren't just looking at me, they were knowing me, deeply and completely. And then, he spoke. His voice was unlike anything I had ever heard. It was not just sound, it was a resonance. A vibration that went beyond my ears and reached deep into my heart. It carried perfect authority, but also perfect love. His voice was both powerful and gentle at the same time. And when he spoke, it was as if everything around me paused to listen. Tell them that I am more real than their doubt, more present than their fear, and more loving than their shame, he said, with a smile that lit up the entire realm. The words he spoke were not just words, they were truth. The weight of his words settled into my heart like a deep and gentle truth that I could not ignore. It was as though everything I had ever believed, all the knowledge I had gathered, was suddenly put into perspective. I knew, with absolute certainty, that I was standing in the presence of something infinitely greater than anything I had ever experienced. His love was not abstract, it was real, tangible, and it filled everything, even the space between us. In that moment, I understood everything. I saw clearly why I became a heart surgeon. I understood why I lived the life I did, why I had made the choices I had made. And most profoundly, I understood why I had to experience the heart attack. It was as though a veil had been lifted, and the entirety of my existence suddenly clicked into place. I could see how every step, every trial, every victory, and every heartbreak had led to this moment. The path I had walked, the people I had encountered, the lessons I had learned, everything had meaning. Even the things that once seemed pointless or insignificant. I saw that my entire life had been preparing me for this encounter, for this understanding. I understood now that the experiences I had, the triumphs, the tragedies, the challenges, were all part of a greater purpose. Something far beyond my comprehension at the time. The pain, the suffering, the moments of doubt, everything had a place in the grand design. And it was all leading to this deeper understanding of life, love, and truth. What I felt in that moment was a sense of completeness, a profound knowing that I was exactly where I was meant to be. Everything I had done had brought me here, to this understanding that life was far more than physical existence. It was part of something much bigger, a divine plan that was unfolding in ways I could not yet fully grasp, but would, in time, come to understand. But Jesus also showed me something about time, and what we think of as linear time is just one aspect of a much greater reality. In the realm I was in, time did not unfold the way we experience it on earth. He revealed to me that every prayer, every tear, every joy we experience is part of what he called the eternal now. Everything exists at once, and all our actions, thoughts, and emotions are woven together into an eternal tapestry. There is no past, no future, everything is happening simultaneously in the divine realm. You have been a healer of hearts in the physical realm, he said, acknowledging my life's work. His words carried weight and peace. And I knew that my life, every surgery, every patient, was part of something much bigger. He then blessed me. And as his hands touched me, I felt the weight of his divine love and purpose. It was overwhelming, yet comforting. And then, in an instant, I felt myself being pulled back. The tunnel of light that had carried me into this realm gently returned me to my body. The next thing I knew, I was gasping for air on the floor of the conference room, surrounded by my shocked co-workers. Dr. Chen was still there, tears streaming down his face, unable to believe what had just transpired. The cardiac monitor, which had shown a flat line just moments before, now displayed a perfect sinus rhythm, better than my normal baseline. It was nothing short of miraculous. Since that day, my understanding of life, death, and the nature of consciousness has been completely transformed. I've come out of retirement to establish a research institute focused on studying near-death experiences, NDEs, from a scientific perspective. We're utilizing the latest neuroimaging technology and theories from quantum physics to better understand these profound experiences. We've been looking into the connection between consciousness and what happens when the body dies, seeking to explore how the spiritual world interacts with the physical world. One of the most interesting aspects of our work is the consistency in the stories of those who have had NDEs. When we collect accounts of Jesus from people all over the world, across different cultures and time periods, the descriptions they offer are surprisingly consistent. This is especially true when it comes to aspects of his appearance that don't match traditional artistic depictions. For example, his light brown hair, the shifting color of his eyes, and his unique skin tone appear in accounts from people who have never met or shared their stories. It's fascinating to see these commonalities, and they suggest that what I experienced is not an isolated case, but part of a larger, universal truth. As someone who was once a skeptic, I understand the doubts people might have, and I respect that skepticism. But I would ask them to consider this. As a surgeon, I've been trained to observe, to take precise notes, and to remain objective. The specifics I observed about Jesus, his light brown hair with golden highlights, the way his eyes shifted between brown and blue, the color and texture of his skin, and his perfect proportions, are not vague or mystical descriptions. They are detailed, precise observations from someone who is trained to notice the smallest nuances and stay objective. The fact that these same details, his light brown hair, his shifting eye color, his skin tone, his height, and the symmetry of his features, appear consistently across cultures and times should be of interest to any serious researcher. I know that these details can't easily be dismissed as coincidence. Nothing has changed. And yet everything has changed. After my experience, I still approach life with the same critical mind. But now I understand that our physical world is just the surface of something much deeper, far beyond what we can see or measure. The scientific laws we study in physics, biology, and chemistry are only the surface level of a greater, divine reality. The connections between time, consciousness, and the spiritual realm are far more profound than we currently understand. I've started documenting every detail of my experience, hoping that it can help scientists and researchers understand NDEs better. I've also been collaborating with artists who have had similar experiences to create more accurate depictions of Jesus' appearance. We're working together to bring a more truthful representation of him to life, based on what we've all seen in our individual experiences. But the most profound change is not in the work I'm doing, it's in me. If you've had a similar experience but have been afraid to talk about it, I want you to know that you're not alone. As a doctor, I can tell you with absolute certainty that consciousness transcending physical death is not only possible, it is, in fact, what I now understand to be our natural state. It's a part of the deeper, eternal reality that we are all connected to, whether we realize it or not. For those who haven't had such an experience, let me tell you that the Jesus I met, his light brown hair, his amazing eyes that changed between amber and blue, his perfect proportions, and the overwhelming love he exuded, is more real than anything in this physical world. He knows every detail of your life, every struggle, every triumph, every fear, and he loves you with a completeness that is beyond our human understanding. This is not a distant, abstract love, it is real, personal, and unshakable. He is more present than your doubts, more loving than your shame, and more real than any fear you may carry. If you believe in God and near-death experiences, subscribe to Life at NDE today. Discover inspiring messages from God through powerful near-death stories that bring hope and understanding. Hit subscribe now and join us in spreading the light of faith.